welcome. My name is David Kramer. I'm the president of Freedom House, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this morning for a very timely discussion on freedom of expression in Latin America, new trends and old challenges. The event this morning comes, I think, at a very important time where we've seen freedom of expression deteriorate at an alarming rate across the region. And in fact, Freedom House survey shows that freedom of expression has deteriorated in Latin America faster than in any other part of the world. U.S. attention to the many challenges that Latin America faces on freedom of expression is critical to avert backsliding throughout the region and to minimize the potentially negative effects that these ongoing attacks have on democratic institutions. In 2011, 24 journalists were killed, one of the most violent years we've seen for journalists in the Americas. In some countries, including in Colombia and Mexico, powerful non-state actors, particularly organized crime, present a serious threat for journalists, particularly those who report on drug trafficking, corruption, and public security. And my organization is heading up an effort in Mexico to work along lines supporting journalists and others who are trying to look into protecting freedom of the press and freedom of expression. In other cases, we've seen attempts to curtail the press through more governmental efforts, through new forms and sophisticated forms of restrictive legislation, judicial cases using outdated legal provisions, such as criminal libel and slander, and an openly hostile rhetoric against the press. In Argentina, for example, where we've seen significant setbacks for press freedom lately, in a country that we are keeping a close eye on. Sadly, we believe we will hear more and more about Argentina in the coming months in this regard. Ecuador has also been in the eye of the storm due to the case against El Universo and the book, The Big Brother. The international community has followed events in Ecuador very closely and remains concerned not only about the chilling effect these cases have had, but also about continued intimidation against the press even after these high-profile cases. In Venezuela, of course, freedom of expression situation has been critical for several years now and continues to be of great concern. In the run-up to the potentially game-changing election in October, the press has already started to come under increased harassment and attacks and acts of intimidation. And this is sadly likely only going to get worse. We have this morning a terrific panel with us, and my thanks to Milton Coleman for moderating today's session, current president of the Inter-American Press Association, and also deputy managing editor of the Washington Post. But before we turn to our panel, I'm particularly grateful to introduce Senator Menendez, who is joining us here this morning. Senator Menendez has been a tireless advocate on issues involving the Americas, and in particular on freedoms in the Americas. And we're very pleased, given his position on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and his other work, that he's agreed to join us here this morning and offer some opening words. So Senator Menendez, thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your introduction, and to Freedom House for its invitation. I'm thrilled to be here today. Welcome to the nation's capital. Para mí es un placer estar aquí con todos estos periodistas distinguidos del hemisferio y con una institución como Freedom House que promueve la libertad no solamente en este hemisferio, pero en el mundo, una de las organizaciones ejemplar de nuestro país. Y ahora que me he legitimizado, me perdonan que voy a hacer el resto de mi discurso en inglés. Pero le contesto después la pregunta en español. It worked? Okay. I'm now legitimized. I also welcome the distinguished foreign dignitaries who are here in the audience today as well. I have, for nearly 20 years now, between the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, sitting both on the House International Relations Committee and its Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, and in the Senate Foreign Relations, where I have the privilege of chairing the Western Hemisphere, the Subcommittee on Global Narcotics, been a strong advocate for democracy and human rights in Latin America for a very long time. Not quite as long as Freedom House, but for a very long time. And I want to say it's an honor to be here with some of the brave activists, journalists who are fighting for freedom of expression in their countries in Latin America. Let me share a few observations on press freedom, and then I'm happy, if it's appropriate, to take a question or two. Democracy rests on the ability of people to get the information that they need to make the important decisions in their lives, and the only way to get this information is through an independent media. Thomas Jefferson, one of the great founders of this country, said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." The primary responsibility of the fourth estate, an independent media, is to report on the events and news of the day so people are informed. And having a free press is not a guarantee that the truth will be presented completely or perfectly in any one instance, but that the truth will emerge from the free flow of ideas and discussion. Placing restrictions on the press is really an attempt to limit the flow of information to the people. In today's globalized, interconnected world, any government that restricts the flow of information and censors the press is doing a tremendous disservice to its citizens and does not deserve the trust of its people. In a democracy, we must be able to criticize our government. We must be able to question our leaders. We must be able to understand the laws that govern us and the people who make them. Believe me, there are times that I don't like to be grilled by the media, but I understand that they have an important job to do. Until a few years ago, direct press censorship and serious interference with the media, like persecution, arresting media owners, or even the murder of journalists, was common in the region. Today, restrictions on the press are accomplished sometimes through a more subtle and less visible practice, what many media experts call soft censorship. For example, by criminalizing libel laws, or using tax regulations to put a media organization out of business, or by using advertising contracts to reward or punish certain media. Governments in Latin America are using tactics to suppress the media that, while technically, in some cases legal, are morally reprehensible. And some governments, like the government in Cuba, and some violent criminal elements in the region, still silence their critics through hard censorship, including physical intimidation, violence, and murder. In Ecuador, civil and criminal proceedings for defamation have been initiated by high-ranking public officials on a number of occasions, and this practice sets a dangerous precedent, as it conditions the right to freedom of expression on the pettiness of individual government officials. In the most recent example of this trend, President Correa pardoned 3 executives and a journalist from El Universo newspaper after they were sentenced to 3 years in prison and the payment of $40 million in damages for publishing a critical editorial. However, the president said the sentences were warranted and that the punishment established an important precedent regarding the criminal liability of media executives. Finally, President Correa insisted that the El Universo sentence should serve as a model for Ecuador and Latin America in the fight against the, quote, media dictatorship. Yet it is the Ecuadorian government that has expanded control of media outlets from 1 radio network in 2007 to 17 media operations today. These include 5 television stations, 4 radio stations, 4 magazines, 3 newspapers, and a news agency. So yes, it seems to me that there is a media dictatorship in Ecuador, but it is the government that controls the junta. There is never a more important moment for the media than during a presidential election, when it is essential that the people see the candidate's campaign and understand their positions on the issue, even the opposition candidates. And we are going through that right now in the United States, where the media is playing a very vibrant role in vetting all of those who seek to have the highest office in the land. In Venezuela, however, things do not look promising for the October elections in terms of this transparency, when the Venezuelan people will have the opportunity to elect a new president. In the months leading up to the election, Venezuelans are sure to hear plenty of bombastic campaign speeches from the president, but the question is, how much will they hear from the opposition? The national public media system, comprising all of the state-run media, reported, quote, a poor voter turnout in the opposition's February primaries and described the opposition leaders as, quote, right-wing candidates. Yet more than 3 million Venezuelans voted in primaries, exceeding all expectations. And by selecting one candidate, they have unified the opposition. Late last year, Globovisión, one of the few independent media outlets left in the entire country, was fined more than $2 million by the country's National Telecommunications Commission for, quote, violating broadcast regulations when it showed footage of a prison riot. The owners of Globovisión have had to flee Venezuela after their businesses were confiscated, their homes invaded, and threats made against their family members. Restrictions on media freedom are nothing new in Venezuela, and it seems to be seen, and it remains to be seen that there will be even more censorship as the election approaches. What is certain, however, is that these heavy-handed threats to the independent media will influence their broadcasting decisions and give Chavez an unfair advantage in his bid to keep the presidency. I'm also concerned about new legislation in Argentina, approved by the Senate in December and quickly signed into law by President Kirchner, establishing newsprint as a commodity of public interest and placing it under government regulation. I understand that Clarín and La Nación have controlling interest in the largest newsprint company in Argentina, but the government could have chosen other ways of dealing with that situation. It's important that existing anti-monopoly rules be applied to newsprint production in such a way as to foment its free production. In particular, the government must not use the pretext of regulating monopolies to create any restriction on the freedom of press. Finally, as activists for press freedom in Latin America, I know that you are familiar with the Office of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom, created by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in October of 1997. This special rapporteurship was created by the Commission as a permanent, independent office that acts within the framework and with the support of ICO. I like to think of the rapporteur as a free speech watchdog for Latin America, and I think that Ms. Botero, the current rapporteur, has done a very good job in performing this function. And I look forward to their annual report on freedom of the press, which will come out next week. The Office of the Special Rapporteur encourages the freedom of thought and expression throughout the hemisphere. And given the fundamental role this right plays in developing the democratic system and consolidating other rights, I personally stand ready to defend the Special Rapporteur against any country that may try to eliminate the office. Whether through violent means, the use of restrictive media laws, or economic strangulation, the end remains the same: to limit freedom of expression, to eliminate dissenting voices, to prescribe a media system that serves the ruler rather than the people. The method evolves, refines, but the battle remains the same. These days, being a journalist is not an easy task. Whether one is reporting from a war zone, or facing censorship at home, or working for low pay in a small-town newspaper in the United States. It is a noble profession, one that should be respected and admired, not a profession that should be treated with contempt and oppressed. And I would just finally close in saying that this is not just simply the views of the United States of America. These are the views that were adapted in the Democracy Charter of the OAS. And I just want to read 2 articles. Article 1, the peoples of the America have a right to democracy, and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it. And as part of that, Article 4 says, freedom of expression and of the press are essential components of the exercise of democracy. That is the charter that all of the countries of the OAS have committed themselves to. It is not simply an American view, it is an inter-American view, and it is one that we need to uphold. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Anyone have any questions? Stun them into silence. This is a chance chance to ask a U.S. Senator a question.
We do have some journalists in the room, right?
There we are.
We have
Ana?
okay. You spoke about Argentina, and you said that governments shouldn't use anti-monopoly laws to repress the press. Could you develop it a little bit more? What do you mean by that? And how do you see on the whole the situation of freedom of the press in Argentina?
Well, I think it is problematic when you take newsprint and you say that it is a national commodity, and in doing so you ultimately can control how that newsprint is accessed, then you can control what is written. And it seems to me that if there was some type of challenge in getting newsprint to a broader universe, that there were other ways, including incentives and whatnot, to produce newsprint that would have been open to a broader sector of those who wish to publish. But by converting it into a national commodity and controlling it, you therefore control the very access to the press that you want. I am concerned about that, as well as some of the other things that are going on in that respect as well. So I think that there is a difference between trying to enlarge the universe of who can have access to print and trying to therefore control it by having governmental control over it. And that's clearly, in my mind, it is moving not in the direction of expansion, but in control.
More question? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Sonia Shadwick, Global Vision Venezuela. Do you know we are in Venezuela in electoral year? And what specifically are your concerns regarding freedom of expression in Venezuela?
Well, as I said, clearly the state-run press has been dominant. It has ultimately mischaracterized the elections that took place in the primary for the opposition. It tried to paint the opposition as right-wing. It tried to suggest, even though it had a record turnout, that it was somewhat different. It seeks to oppress entities like Global Vision. So in my mind, what we are headed towards, what Mr. Chavez is in the midst of, is not creating an openness within the country and the opportunity for Venezuelans to understand the difference between his views and the views of his opponents, but to suppress the ability for his opponents' views to be known, which are essence in a presidential election. We are seeing here in the United States every day. You can turn on just about any station, read any newspaper, and you will have an in-depth analysis of what every candidate who is running in the Republican primary is saying and doing and what they're thinking, and what the president is saying and doing and thinking, and they are subject to both inspection and criticism at the end of the day. In that process, the American people have an opportunity to get a better sense of what these people are all about, who aspire to govern them, and make a greater informed decision as we get to November. That is what's happening in Venezuela, and therefore that serves very poorly the Venezuelan people, and it is not the promotion of democracy as called for in the Democratic Charter.
All right, well, now we have a lot of...
I don't want to mess up your... I'll do whatever you want.
Why don't we take two
Okay.
and you can answer them
Yeah.
together? So
You
we'll go
choose.
here and here.
Senator, yeah, Maria with FI News Services. You know, you listed off a few countries that are a specific concern to you and I would assume to the rest of the Congress about freedom of the press. Is there anything you are concretely working on, a bill or a resolution to force these governments to open up and allow freedom of the press? Is there anything you're working on to address those things you're concerned about?
And why don't we take the question here and then you respond?
Yeah, very simple. Marisa Palacios, working for the Pan American Development Foundation. You mentioned that due to your long history in the Senate and in public office, you've been grilled by the media. And I would like to know what advice you have for leaders in Latin America who are very intolerant to that type of criticism and how you face it.
Do you mind taking one more?
Develop a tough skin. I will let you.
Vaya dog.
I am Silvia Pisani with Venezuela in Argentina, and I would like to ask you particularly your concerns about Argentina and the freedom of expression.
Okay, so let me try to bring those all together. I'll try to take them in order. So, what are we doing? We cannot impose upon another country what must rise from its own people and its demands. But we can create a spotlight on countries in the hemisphere. We can insist on living by the democratic charter. I was one of those who was greatly enthused when the democratic charter was passed. I thought it was a landmark opportunity for the hemisphere to continue to consolidate its march towards democracy and freedom. However, the charter means nothing if it is not enforced at the end of the day. And so, as I said, Article 4 of the charter talks very clearly from a hemispheric perspective, not a U.S. perspective, but on a hemispheric perspective of freedom of the press as an essential freedom for a democracy. And so I think we need to be using the OAS to press this issue. I think we need to make it very clear, as we are a big donor to the OAS, that the Special Rapporteur is someone who needs to continue to exist, to be independent. There are efforts to cut that budget dramatically and to limit the scope of what they can do that would undermine the essence of the Special Rapporteur. I think that when we are assisting other countries through financial aid, whether that be through AID or other entities, we should be looking that we are engaging in countries in which freedom of the press is observed. And if we are going to have programs in that country in which freedom of the press is limited, let us work with independent civil society actors, not with the government itself, as a way to incentivize that. So those are all elements of things that we can do that I think we should do. With reference to what would I say to the elected brethren of the hemisphere who are intolerant about the press, I would say to them that, that if they are ultimately promoting the well-being of those who they seek to represent, the press can actually be a strong ally. Not an ally in the sense that they cooperate with you, but that if you are right, and if you are upholding the views and the needs of the citizens, you are likely to see a press that is going to give your cause the type of recognition that could hopefully get others to join you to achieve a goal. For example, right now I am fighting to end $24 billion in tax subsidies to the big 5 oil companies. And that has had, because they will make an enormous amount of money, they don't need the American taxpayers' money for that. In our fight to do this, we have had the press make their own observations and in many cases editorialize about that from their perspective, that this is the right thing. So if you are doing the right thing, you will find that in fact that free flow of information can very well ultimately end up as a benefit to you in your cause in pursuit of something. And that at the end of the day, if you truly believe in democracy, that this is an essential part of it. Sometimes you will enjoy the benefit of a story or an editorial that will side with your view. Other times it will criticize you. But that is the very essence of what informing citizens are all about. And that the tolerance of accepting both the criticism and the interrogatory is a critical part of a democracy. And then finally, with reference to Argentina, look, when I see, how you can try to subvert for what seems like, everybody's claiming in that fight that they're on the right side, I find it difficult to believe that the government has to create and control a commodity in order to promote the opportunity for a broader opportunity to newsprint and therefore a more maybe diverse audience. So there is a way to have created, if the government was concerned that there was a monopoly on who controls newsprint, there is a way for the government to create newsprint and to incentivize. We often do that here through the tax code, but there are a whole host of other ways to create incentives to create a broader access to newsprint. The way in which it was done in Argentina is obviously not to broaden the press, but from my perspective, to control the press. And that is just one of many things that makes me concerned about where we are headed in Argentina and throughout this hemisphere. Muchísimas gracias. Un placer estar con ustedes. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Por favor, don't be confused by this. I'm going to speak mostly in English. But as we turn over to the panelists, they will all speak in Spanish, and we'll just proceed in Spanish. It's all of your fault because none of you had on earphones when the English speakers were speaking, so I figured, okay, they can understand English. I can do it in English. I'm Milton Coleman. I'm senior editor of the Washington Post and currently the president of the Inter-American Press Association, which is celebrating its 70th year in existence. My job this morning is to offer you a quick oversight and then allow us to look much more closely at three particular states in Latin America, at Venezuela, at Ecuador, and Argentina, and to quickly make my remarks and get out the way so you can hear these gentlemen who have come from so far to give you firsthand information. I would like to ask you, as you listen to the three gentlemen, to keep 5 or 6 questions in your mind, because this panel is about old problems, new concerns. And let me just raise 5 or 6 questions just to keep in your mind. When you hear them talk, ask yourself, what we're really seeing now an effort by democratically elected governments to use democracy to destroy democracy. Senator Menendez spoke very clearly about the importance of people in a democracy being informed. And if you limit freedom of expression, you limit the people's ability to be informed. And that becomes what one Spanish scholar has called the fight over rule by law as opposed to rule of law. You make laws that reflect what you want to do, and you leave that in. So keep that in your mind. Secondly, the business side of this whole thing. It has been mentioned this morning how efforts are being made to destroy news organizations as businesses. The $40 million would have probably wiped out El Universo. Mr. Zulaga in Venezuela has gone into exile and has lost lots of money. You know, in Argentina, the feeling is maybe what they really want to do is take over Clarín and La Nación. And is that a part of the new thing that we're seeing that people are doing? Point number 3 is the government now trying to say, we will determine the truth. We will be the ones who will determine the truth, and the truth can be determined by simple denial.